Like what if we just didn't judge people? Like, is that a radical idea?
Radical. That's the craziest thing that's been said on all of my podcasts. Hello, everybody. You're listening to Chatting with Candace. I'm your host, Candace Horback. Before we get started on this week's episode, if you want to support the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandace.com. From there, you can either sign up for our Patreon account, where you get early access to episodes, shoutouts, and eventually some AMAs. Or you can click that little link that says Buy Me Coffee. Both things help me out a ton. I'm new to podcasting. Every single dollar really does make a difference. This week, I want to give a shout out to Oscar Matos Linares. I hope I didn't butcher your name, but thank you so much for being a Patreon. I really appreciate your support, and I'm glad to have you. This week, we have a very special guest. We have Scott Barry Kaufman joining the podcast. His most recent book is Transcend, where he kind of re-evaluates Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you don't know what that is, you're totally fine. We get into all of that in layman's terms. This was a really awesome conversation. We got into some really fun topics. He's just such a nice guy. So I really hope that you enjoy the podcast. Give him a follow. He's got some really cool courses that he's offering as well, which he'll plug towards the end of the podcast. So enjoy.
Anyway,
Oh,
it
that's
was a
so
really
funny.
funny. You brought us together, so I just want to say thank you for
Oh, of
uniting,
course.
bringing us a reunion. I'll send you the Twitter exchange. I think you'll get a kick out of it.
I definitely will. Yeah, he's a really funny guy. I love him. Well, let's do this thing. So I first stumbled upon your Twitter account, and I really like you caught my eye with like your hashtag, and I had already had your book and all of that. And I was like, oh, he like promotes neurodiversity, and you don't hear that term a lot. So for a lot of people, they're like, well, what does that sounds like a big fancy word? And that just means like different kinds of brains and different kinds of thinking, and some people that maybe have like disabilities or quirks, right? Like that's kind of like a layman's way to put it. um, I guess what kind of got you into an advocacy for that? Because I listened to one of your YouTube videos where you did a TED Talk and you were talking about your experience with the education system, and I was smiling ear to ear listening to you listening to you to talk. Like you have like
Yeah.
such a wonderful storytelling presence about you. So if you could, for the listeners, kind of give your background, because it's just so fun.
Thank you. I really appreciate that you brought up the neurodiversity. That's actually a topic that a lot of interviewers don't bring up with me anymore. They did, a while ago when my first book, my book on gifted, came out on intelligence. But more recently, people haven't brought it up. So thank you. Any opportunity I can get a chance to talk about that really lights me up. It's something I'm really passionate about. When I was a kid, I had an auditory learning disability. So I just had a lot of fluid in my ears. Like the first 3 years of my life, I was essentially deaf, and so teachers thought I was stupid. And I mean, to be fair to them, I was a bit slow, but it's a reasonable inference. But no, no, I like being cheeky, but no, it was like it took me an extra couple milliseconds to process information in real time through hearing. So yeah, in class I looked like checked out. So I was a bit of a troublemaker. Like I became like the class clown. I used like humor as my way of like, I was always in the detention office. They're like, "Why would you make all the kids laugh? Like it disrupts the material." I'm like, "Well, it's more interesting than the material." But anyway, so I really it was frustrating, like growing up with this learning disability. But the big insight that I felt like I had as a kid growing up about human potential is that all my friends in special ed, we were all the troublemakers. We were the outcasts. We were considered, we're the ones in like smokers row. You know what I mean? Like the ones that everyone's like, "Oh, you don't talk to those freaks." But I felt like they had so much greater potential than anyone realized. Like the teachers didn't give them credit. Even like when I hung out with them, I didn't feel like their parents believed in them, and I just felt like at a real young age, like I kind of knew in my gut that I wanted to kind of devote my life to helping bring out the full potential in people, especially those who may appear slow or not as smart, or a whole number of reasons. I'm really interested in neurodiversity, and so glad you brought that up because I think that like in this discussion of diversity, I think that gets left out of the discussion because people are focusing, and that's fine, to talk about racial and gender issues. But I do feel like the deeper aspects of our brain functioning and the way we see the world and perceive things that aren't just skin deep, I think are really important discussions to bring into the diversity discussion. And I'd love to hear what you think of that.
So, when I was listening to your story, you had mentioned that you were trying to get into the gifted classes and you scored poorly. So they were like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, you don't belong here because this one test says you can't go there." And my husband, who I actually, I mean, everyone's gonna say I'm biased, but he's like a very intelligent man. But he was in the slow classes most of his life. He has like pretty moderate ADD, not ADHD, but ADD, and his brain just like works differently. Like when anytime I'm joking with him, I call him like a beautiful mind. The way he just
Yeah.
like pieces and like pulls and puts things together is just different than anyone I've met. So they would just say that you're stupid because he's not doing it the way that all of the other kids are doing it. So for a long time, he had to kind of fight that story that was like engraved into his brain since childhood, which is you're dumb, you're not good enough, you're never going to be successful, and you're always going to be, with the dummies. So it took him into like probably, 20s, maybe even 30s for him to be like, this is actually my potential. And just because I don't perform well on a standardized test, that doesn't mean like that's the full capability of what I can do. So I guess moving forward, because you see a huge spike with, especially with boys with ADD and ADHD.
Oh yeah.
So how do
And
we
autism. And
Mm,
autism.
and yeah, and then actually I have 2 nieces that, are on the spectrum as well, so you just see that they learn differently, not that they're stupid, right? They need a different avenue. So how do we get this kind of, like, broadly implemented into the education system instead of just saying, "You can't do any better than this, so just be quiet, go to the small room, go on the small bus, and, that's where you're gonna be forever."
Is your husband around by any chance?
Yeah, he's upstairs.
Can I talk to him for a second?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Give him some hope about his mind.
Yeah, 1 second, let me grab him.
Oh hey, how's it going?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, what's your name?
Eric.
Hi, Eric. Nice to meet you. As a kid, when I had this auditory learning disability, I developed ADD up the kazoo, personally as well. And what I've discovered in my research and everything I've done in more recent years is that it has a lot of creative gifts, and there's like a part of the brain that has to do with imagination that is enhanced in people with ADD, and so I've tried to rethink it as a overactive imagination disorder, not as anything else. So I don't know. I wanted to give you some hope and
That's all. That's
and
awesome.
different framing of the way you view yourself. Because I don't know if you were like me, if you were bullied as a kid at all or anything. But
I don't know if
yeah.
bullied is the word, but it's definitely like so. Growing up, I went to a Catholic school, first
Mm,
through eighth grade, and I know that at some point, I don't know, maybe it was like it started probably third grade, where they just stuck you in a basement. They're like, okay, well, you have a learning disability. Go to this smaller
yeah.
class with a couple of different kids, and then I don't know, we'll see where it goes from there. But it was far less of a curriculum, right? It wasn't really challenging whatsoever, and it was really just I wasn't like overactive as a kid. I was more like I just daydreamed, right?
Yeah.
So then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, you have a learning disability because you can't get
That's
through a
exactly
test.
right.
Yeah.
Daydreaming is I've been trying to bring that back as a positive thing.
So what is
So
what's
yeah.
the what is it? What part of the brain? Like what makes it different?
Yeah, I'll send you the article. I wrote an article for Scientific American called "The Creative Gifts of ADD" that maps out that and the neuroscience of that. But it's
Yeah.
called the default mode brain network, and I've called it the imagination network because I thought default mode brain network was a boring name for it. But it's not the part that has to do with your attention focus. In the world out there, it actually has to do with your ability to imagine and focus on your inner world. So it turns out people with ADD actually have an enhanced inner world, even though from the outside it looks like they're checked out or they can't concentrate. It's because they're getting so much interference from their wonderfully rich mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack Candace's podcast, but I wanted to just if I could offer you any understanding at all about
Yeah.
your brain. Yeah,
That's awesome. That's good. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
my pleasure.
And I'm back.
That was unexpected.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad though that you guys had something to talk about.
Yeah, me too. That was wonderful. Thanks for doing that.
Of course. I don't know
Yeah.
if he mentioned because I was upstairs watching The Babe, but one of the things worries about is like our son getting, ADD. I think it's suggested that it's hereditary, and
Yeah.
how we help him with school. And I can't remember what podcast I was listening to. It was a parenting podcast, but they had said that some of the
Mhm.
top boys' schools around the world actually don't have desks or tables, or I'm sorry, chairs rather, so that the
Mhm.
boys can like run around and like get their physical energy out, and then and still learn, and actually improves what they retain. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've.
that's right. Like if you can arrange a school system in a particular way that's conducive to that kind of mind, you actually get extraordinary things out of them. And that's the thing that's most heartbreaking, I think, about the way we set up our education, our one size all fits education system,
Mhm,
because the ones who benefit the least from it are tend to be the ones that could make the most creative contribution to our society.
mhm,
So yeah, there's lots of things you can do, for the ADD mind. These kinds of these kids just love to have a personal project that they can get involved in, and they love experiential learning and being able to kind of get in that flow state, that complete absorption state. It's a paradox because once they get into that state, they can focus better than any motherfucker. I don't know if I can curse on
yeah,
this
yeah, you can
podcast,
totally curse, yeah.
but I mean that's the really exciting thing, is that it's like don't mess with them. Don't mess with a person with ADD and flow.
That's how he is too. Like if he's like really into a book or an article or a podcast, I could be a foot away
Yeah,
from him and I'm like, babe, babe, babe. And he's like totally unaware. Like you cannot break that man's attention. So yeah, it is definitely a
that's right.
paradox. But
Yeah.
we're trying to navigate it and find books to help us prepare just in case that he is, because um like we mentioned, it's not really set up for anyone with any kind of diversity, right? It's just like this is the way that you
Mm,
learn, and it just doesn't work for a lot of kids. Which I see some universities getting rid of the SATs, and everyone's like causing a
mm.
fit about it. But when you meet someone like my husband, I mean, he sucks at those things, and it
Yeah,
definitely isn't.
I suck at those things
Oh,
too.
do you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like a proper representation of like who he is or what he's capable of. So I mean, I'm for getting rid of those tests personally.
Yeah, I can't concentrate in like a 2 hour standardized test. It's
Hmm.
like so boring.
I would get so much anxiety when we had like the state
Mhm.
tests in high school,
Yeah.
and then like it would end up doing awful just because of my anxiety. Um,
Yeah.
so I did want to talk about your book Transcend, and what I think is interesting is Maslow's hierarchy. So not everyone's going to know what that is, especially if they never took like a psych class or it's been like a really long time. But essentially, it's a pyramid of needs, right? And then you kind of like redefined that. So I want to talk about how you kind of turned the pyramid into a sailboat. And then I also noticed that you got rid of like the base model, which was physiological, and if there was a reason for that.
Sure. So, have you seen like the famous pyramid of hierarchy of needs? I
Yes.
think everyone kind of learns it in their introductory psychology classroom, where you have this pyramid with basic physiological needs at the bottom, and then you have security needs and connection, belonging, and self-esteem needs, and then boop, you go up to self-actualization. If you got all that, then you're self-actualized. Well, it turns out when I was digging into the writings of Abraham Maslow, the humanistic psychologist who is credited for that, he never actually drew a pyramid in any of his writings. When I was looking through his unpublished and published writings, I really got absorbed in that, and I was like, "Where's the pyramid? How's he no pyramid?" Like what? So, um, so I was like, "Got to tell people about this." And some other researchers were independently also discovering that he never had a pyramid. And Todd Bridgman and colleagues wrote a really cool paper about tracing it to a 1960s organizational psychologist who I believe it started off as a step ladder, with the man self-realized at the top with the flagpole because only men could be self-realized in the 60s, I guess. And so that was like the kind of idea about this. And when you actually dig into the writings of Maslow, you realize that what he really emphasized was the difference between security and growth. That sort of that dance, one could say. We don't feel as though we can fully grow and get outside our comfort zone and take risks when we are motivated by deficiency. So what I really liked is his distinction between deficiency motivation and growth motivation. I think we're seeing a lot of deficiency motivation right now. I don't know if you've noticed in America. Uh,
Just a little bit.
yeah, it seems like everyone is motivated by deficiency, right? Like, everything is like, and that you tend to see that under situations where there's a society doesn't feel stable. This is a very common thing that you'll see in a society that doesn't feel stable, a society that people cling to their tribes. They cling, they're, it's very cyclical in human nature, and it's also very predictable, based on what we know about human nature. But I thought a better metaphor than the pyramid that Maslow never drew was a sailboat. And I didn't know if you wanted me to talk about the sailboat
Yeah,
metaphor, but I can, yeah, okay.
definitely. I want,
Um,
and definitely why you chose a sailboat rather than the pyramid.
Well, the pyramid kind of connotes like a way of like life's a video game in some way, right? Like you reach some level of need, like a certain threshold, like the
Mhm.
need for belonging, and you reach a certain level of belonging, and then like it's like as if some voice from above is like, "Congrats, you've unlocked connection," and then he can move up, move up to connection. You don't have to worry about like the one below it ever again. And I don't think that that's the best framing for one's existence,
Mhm.
because no one's exempt from returning to lower needs when in certain, we ebb and flow out of it, in and out of it, right?
Mhm.
We can pretend like, oh, my self-esteem sorted, I don't need to worry about that anymore, I'm just self-actualizing, baby, I'm not calling you baby, but I'm
Yeah,
saying, like, I'm just,
yeah.
yeah, okay, okay. I'm self-actualizing. And but the problem with the person who says that is that give them some critical feedback, and don't tell me that they don't bloop, they fall right back to
Mhm.
to the self-esteem need, it's like I can feel as like self-actualized as can be some days, and then like if I write a tweet that I'm really excited about and gets like one like, I'm like, what the fuck? That got one like. That deserved at least three likes. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's all about, the point I wanted to emphasize in my book and with the sailboat is that we're one whole operating unit. We need to integrate ourselves, and we need to be a harmonious unit where all the parts of ourselves are working with each other, not against each other. We don't feel like we're fighting a civil war within ourselves, which is how Maslow put it.
Mhm.
Um, so with sailboat is more of like an experience through the vast unknown of the sea, and I think that's what life really is. Life is to be experienced, to go on adventures, to get outside your comfort zone, to grow, to realize your full potentialities, but also acknowledging that if our boat has too many holes in it, if our basic needs are so deficient, like our needs for connection, safety, and self-esteem, if they're so low, we don't feel comfortable enough opening our sail and being fully vulnerable. But once we have a certain level where we feel like the boat's secure, then we have to grow. You have to open that sail someday. If you're going to grow, you're just not going to grow.
Mhm.
It's like just being secure, it doesn't equal growth, right?
Mhm.
So going in the sea, and knowing that the winds and the waves can come crashing down on us at any point, right?
Mhm.
But we still move in our purposeful direction with a spirit of exploration and love. And that's the sailboat metaphor in a nutshell.
So you brought up like deficiency motives. Can you elaborate a little bit of what those are for the listeners? So when I hear that, I think kind of like growth mindset versus limited mindset a little bit, and some people might get uh, I don't know, maybe a little bit on guard about this because it's like it's whether or not like you're looking at things from like an introspective way or an extra like or from the outside, like life happens to me, not for me, kind of a thing. Are
Why would
those
people get on guard?
because I think people when shit hits the fan and let's say like you're like and especially right now like given 2020 and the very beginning of 2021, it's very understandable that people are going through a very rough time like on all walks. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's a little bit more satisfying to be able to point outward and say, this is the reason, rather than reframing it, because there's always a way to
Yeah.
look at things with gratitude and be able to kind of like open up your sailboat or like move your way up that pyramid. Does that make sense? So, like, looking at things from a
Yeah.
deficiency motivator would be like, I lost my job. I haven't been able to see my family, and I'm going to be in this negative spiral. And then you have your physiological and your safety parts of the pyramid just kind of like buckling under you a little bit. But if you were to
Yeah.
reframe that and then find a source of gratitude and a source of purpose, then it wouldn't be as detrimental to your growth.
I wrote an article for Scientific American called "Is It Time for a Personal Growth Mindset?" To distinguish it from a growth mindset. And what I mean by that is, I think we want to make sure that we're choosing, making decisions that are helping us grow as a whole person,
Mhm.
and not just one part of us. Um, a lot of people, so that's why I distinguish between a growth motivation and a growth mindset. What I'm here today to promote on this podcast of yours is a growth motivation, not a growth mindset. And it might be taboo. It's taboo in certain circles to say that. There's enough people promoting a growth mindset that I think there's
Mhm.
space for me to promote a growth motivation. Um, and the difference, as I see it, is that you can have a growth mindset up the kazoo, for the wrong things,
Mhm.
right? You could have all the growth mindset in the world to do well in standardized tests, and yet you let all these other aspects of your being just flounder.
Mhm.
You could have the biggest growth mindset to, like, and grit. Grit's another big one, and I love Angela Duckworth and the work she does. But the way again, the way it's applied sometimes, it's like it's as if the characteristic of grit and growth motivation, growth mindset, it like that in and of itself is all that matters,
Mhm.
right? But the context of the rest of your self is what matters. Are you to me, a growth motivation is one, are you making decisions that are leading to greater integration and wholeness in who you are? When we're deficiency motivated, we're making decisions that only are to defend ourselves.
Mhm.
um, when we're in deficiency motivation, we're often like treating ourselves like a fort that needs to be protected at all costs,
Mhm.
and that tends to lead to rigidity
Mhm.
in thinking.
Mhm.
Right, you see that right now in every extreme direction,
Mhm.
every radicalization, is there's this very rigidity aspect to it, right?
Mhm.
That's being motivated by deficiency. But when you're motivated by growth, is the motivation, you're constantly asking yourself, will this decision, or goal help me grow as a whole person? Abraham Maslow has a great quote, and I'll be quoting Abraham Maslow all day long. He has this great quote: "What's not worth doing is not worth doing well." And again, I hope my point makes sense. You can have a growth motivation towards a goal that isn't right for you,
Mhm.
so you should just be rewarded. Oh, great. Look, you have the growth mindset. You're amazing. You're amazing. You're wonderful. It's like, no, that wasn't actually the right goal for that person. You see a lot of posturing. You see a lot of people who think they should be someone else, or they think they should be, in their career, or you can kind of tell, you kind of tell people who are not comfortable in their own skin,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And my heart breaks sometimes when I see some of that, because you just want to say to that person, like, you know um you know like, there are decisions that will be right for you, and you should have confidence to take those decisions. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So I guess if you find I guess self-awareness is part of it, but when you find yourself maybe in a habit of making decisions based off of like deprivation or lack, how do you is it possible to start looking at things differently if you don't have those basic needs met? Like if you don't have that safety met or that connection met? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with that now. So it's like, how do we make these improvements when we're still being told we can't see each other, or like I still can't open my business, or whatever your reason is, because it
Mhm.
is such a crazy time. So is it possible to reframe the way that you're thinking when you have all of the external factors coming at you like super hard?
Yes, I do think so. And I think that if uh, one of the founders of this humanistic philosophy that I live my life by, Viktor Frankl,
I
if
love
he
him.
can it oh, great, great. If he can, he's influenced my work a lot as a modern day humanistic psychologist. I consider him a foundation of my work. If he and others in the concentration camp could find moments of joy, then anyone can. Okay, like,
Mhm.
come on, let's be
Mhm.
honest.
Mhm.
Um, the thing is, you're in control of the joy. Don't No one can rob you of your capacity to create meaning and to have hope in your head.
Mhm.
for the future. And if you let people win, if you let that happen, then you're letting that happen, in to a certain degree. Now, I think that it's a complex issue because when we talk about mental illness, or people who are suffering with like severe like depression, for instance, the last thing you want to tell someone with depression is, "Oh, just be happy. Oh, just be joyful." And I want to be very nuanced in my answers because I don't think that's the best way to help someone with depression. But I will say that one of the best remedies, not remedies, that sounds corny, remedies for mental illness, like sounds like mother's home remedy, the best tonic for mental illness. One of the sometimes I say like words I don't mean to say, and I'm like, what did I just say that? One of the best ways to help reduce the suffering of someone with depression, that's what I'm trying to say, is actually helping that person not focus on themselves so much. Self transcendence, helping them get out into the community and help others and get out of their own head. I view neuroticism as a form of narcissism. I call it vulnerable narcissism.
Mm.
And so actually self transcendence is a really great way of helping people who are kind of stuck in a deficiency motivation mindset.
Mhm.
The best way for them is not to keep ruminating on, oh, woe is me, 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 but say, oh, let me give something to someone. Let me have gratitude, for whatever I have. I'm alive. Well, that's good. Let's start there.
Mhm.
Um, I like that was a beautiful sunset. Oh, this is a beautiful connection I have with this person. I've always been really fascinated with like researchers who go like there was research who went to the slums of Calcutta in India,
Mm.
people who were living in extreme poverty on the street, and they found that the life satisfaction ratings of those people were higher than the average American.
I've seen
So
those. Mhm.
you don't have to you don't have to wait till your life is all perfect or some level before you can cultivate meaning and connection in your life, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you can find happiness at any point. So, when you get into those ruminating negative like self-talk patterns, is it kind of like, and I guess it goes to the importance of reframing and trying to like find gratitude or look at that sunset or whatever. But if you keep ruminating, is it creating like divots in your brain, almost like a neuro habit, if you will, so that it's like harder to break? So you're almost like reinforcing that negative self-talk or
Yes.
making that depression like even deeper and harder, and every time you choose or force yourself to do something different or think something different than you typically would, you're starting to create a different neural pathway and like helping to break that cycle.
Well, yes, I've written about this because the two wolves parable, of course, right? With
No.
the um I think the parable goes something like someone is asking the elder, like, I feel like there's a war within myself. There's like this good wolf and this bad wolf, and it says, what do I do? How do I overcome this war? And they said, well, it's the one you feed, that matters. What wolf do you feed? Now, I totally messed up that parable, like, so everyone Google
No,
the
it's very
parable
cool.
because I didn't like fully. I'm sure I didn't say it right, but you understand.
I get
You
the
understand the
point.
general idea.
Yeah.
You get the point. And there is a analogy there to the way the brain works. Neurons that fire together wire together. Is the Ebb. The famous neurologist Ebb's description of the brain. And there is something to the more that we feed within ourselves, it does strengthen those connections and those pathways in the brain. There is definitely something to that. That's why I find personally, there are some doors I can't even open a little bit. They just need to be completely shut. Like if I keep chocolate around in my cabinet, then I'm gonna fucking eat the chocolate. Like don't even, it's like I have no self control when it comes to chocolate and other things like that. I just don't even have it. There is a lot to that.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So I think another thing that you mentioned is, so the difference between D love, I have it abbreviated, and B love. So for our listeners, can you talk about the difference between D love and B love and the
Yeah.
significance of it?
This is great. It's funny because you don't even hear the word like love much in like how many times do you turn on CNN and hear the word love?
Because it's the whole "if it bleeds, it leads" nonsense. It's like, you guys
Yeah.
have the power, people have the power, just turn it off. Turn it off until you
Yeah.
start seeing them shift what they're talking about.
Yeah. It's just, and I didn't mean to sorry, I didn't mean to just single out CNN, any of the
All
stations. You
of
turn them
them.
on, it's like
Yeah.
you just the point here is that it's such a refreshing question, really, because I think this is what we need to be talking about more in our society. Because everyone is so be love motivated.
Mhm.
So be love, sorry, everyone is so de love motivated. Don't get it twisted. I messed that up. Rewind. Everyone is so de-love motivated, and what I mean by that is like everyone's like motivated by the hole they have in their soul, right? It's like love me, I need to belong, I need to matter, everyone is obsessed with mattering right now,
Mhm.
right? And look, fair enough, if you come from your whole life, you haven't felt like you've been included and don't feel like you matter in society, and I don't want to denigrate that whatsoever,
Mhm.
but that's still the motivation that is coming from.
Mhm.
And I can distinguish that from be love, as Maslow did. Being love. Be stands for being, and I really like that phrase, because there's two ways that I really love that. One, it means you're being love.
Mhm.
You shine light everywhere you go. You bring people joy. It's part of your being, it's not part of your doing. You see a lot of people who do love, so that they can get more money.
Mhm.
So that I saw a tweet the other day, something that really pissed me off. I retweeted. I was like, oh, I don't like this. It said something like, be kind because it'll increase your competition, or it'll help you dominate or be more competitive. I'm like, that's what the just be kind.
Just be kind.
Period. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, it's like, it really upsets me. And then another way that I think being love really works is, not only are you being love, but also you have love for the being of others. And what that means is that you can love someone even you don't even like, but you admire and appreciate their own sacredness of who they are. I don't think people are really uh, treating each other as sacred. I mean, do you think people are treating each other as sacred right now?
No, and I think a
And
lot of it is
yeah,
because we feel like if someone does something bad, right? And it doesn't matter how bad it is. If you talk to like the spiritual gurus of the world, but you should be able to
yeah,
find like love and compassion for that person. And I don't see it anywhere, especially on social media.
yeah, especially on social media, and that's an interesting bubble, because people start to generalize and think that their group of 12 Twitter people they talk to regularly every day is somehow representative sample
Mhm.
of the world.
Mhm.
And so you can get really really stuck in that way of thinking. That's where all these conspiracy theories come from, and I am seeing some conspiracy theories coming from every direction right now, and it's like it's a fascinating phenomenon for a social psychologist,
Oh,
so sure, social scientist.
oh, I bet. Yeah. And if everyone just reframed the love, and I mean, I think we've all been guilty. Like, I've certainly spent a good amount of my time in like the D love category, and
Me
I've
too.
I feel like I've been in a be love category for a while, and definitely being like a new mom helps
Mm.
kind of like stay there. But so do you know what Biocybernaut is? Have you heard of Biocybernaut?
Never heard of that word in my entire
No?
life.
Okay, so it's ran
Mm-mm.
by Dr. Hart, and he essentially does like alpha brainwave training, theta training, and delta training. And he does a bunch of different things. And I
Mm.
did the alpha one course, and it's basically to try to get you into like a flow state.
Oh,
And you
cool.
get it by neurofeedback. So like you hook your brain up to all these wires, and then you hear your feedback come through these speakers, and then you can kind of see a numerical score as to like if you have coherence happening and all that good stuff. One of the cool ways to get there was by doing like different kinds of forgiveness exercises and like meditations. And
Mm.
he challenged me to like look at some of the more broken relationships that I've had, maybe like people that have been like very abusive or
Mm.
negligent throughout my life. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to ever love this person. I would give it a whole host of reasons why, they did this, or I don't know them anymore because they've been, removed from my life. And he's like, you don't need that. You don't even need to talk to the person to forgive someone. You don't need to talk to the person to have love for someone. And he would have you sit there and in all sorts of different ways go through these forgiveness exercises, and by the end of the day you're like lighter and you're like, holy cow, like I actually have love for this person that caused me an immense amount of pain. And there's a variety
Exactly.
of ways to do it, which is, one of the easy ones is to take this horrible person and take them back in time until maybe they're like a 5-year-old, right? And then you look at like the
Mm.
5-year-old version of this awful person. Like maybe it's a parent, and picture them as a little kid. How do you not have love and compassion for that person that maybe they also had a really shitty upbringing and abusive parents and
Yeah.
they just wanted to be loved? And then round and round we go. So once you break in like into that, you know what I mean? Like you're stopping that chain from perpetuating for you to your child, because now you have love for this
Mm.
person and saying, instead of like this hatred or animosity, and saying like not having that forgiveness, I guess. um so it can be done. It can be done to like the most horrendous people, and I promise you it's like so much better on the other side.
Yeah, that's a really higher level of spiritual understanding if you can get there, a spiritual form of love. I will say that if obviously if you're abused, like have love, but get the fuck out of there.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That doesn't mean
You
you have
know?
to stay.
Well, from afar,
Yes.
far, afar,
Yes, yes,
afar.
yes. And that's the
But
thing too, is
yeah,
some people confuse it. They're like, "Well, if I love this person, if I forgive this person, do I have to bring them back into my life?" And the answer is absolutely not. You can love someone and forgive them and still
yeah,
keep them at a distance and
exactly,
have your healthy boundaries.
exactly. I
Mhm.
wanted to just clarify that, but yeah, no,
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So, I guess, do you wanna kind of describe like what is transcendence? And
Hmm.
because you mentioned like cosmic consciousness, and to some people are like, well, what is cosmic consciousness and what is it to transcend, and self-actualization? Like these are all big words. So
Yeah.
for some people, right? So
Lots of syllables.
so many. So what are all of those big fancy words?
They sound a bit woo woo,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I've made the case that there can be wisdom in the woo woo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the operative word there is can,
Mm-hmm.
because there are a lot of things I'm like, what the heck is that person talking about? But I think that on a scientific foundation, we can place the more transcendent aspects of our being, and and what I mean by that, is a healthy form of transcendence where we don't think that we're some people call it the "I'm enlightened and you're not" effect. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not what I'm talking. You don't reach enlightenment so that you can look down on others, from above and be like, oh, I'm so superior
Mm-hmm.
to that, because that's called narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
But not enlightenment. But I think that there's a healthy form of enlightenment where you feel connected to all of humanity. You can really feel a common humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and you feel a sense of wholeness and integration within yourself that emanates outward into the world, so that who you are and what you love doing is synergistically at the same time good for society. I think that it's called synergy. It's a term that Maslow co-opted from the anthropologist Ruth Benedict. But um, the thing about this higher level of transcendence is that a lot of false dichotomies fall away. A lot of these we have in our we're not at that level of consciousness in our society right now. We have so many dichotomies. Um, you're either good or you're evil.
Mm-hmm.
You're either selfish or you're a giver. You're either male female, like you can't kind of like combine different aspects and in a sense of being. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. I know you had like
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah, Deborah. So
we could spend a whole another hour just getting into that.
that's a whole other discussion. But I'm not talking about sex,
Right.
biological sex. I'm
Mhm.
talking about just in terms of like
Gender expression.
characteristics.
Mhm.
Like, well, you're either a man and you're just dominant alpha, or you're
Mhm.
a female and you're this weak pussy. No, I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
joking. but I'm saying both of those. I'm saying I don't like either of those
Right.
things. Right.
Mhm.
I like the fact that we can integrate. We can come to a higher level of integration. And that's, that's wisdom. I was on Sam Harris's podcast, and he asked me what wisdom was, and I think that's what wisdom is. Thinking, really thinking about that is our ability to be able to see these polarities of human nature and the imperfections, and accept the imperfections of humans, and I accept our own imperfections, but still have love for humanity. It to me, it's the broken, not the broken, but the cynic who's not self-actualizing. I think that once you've fallen to complete cynicism about humanity, you've really fallen into the deprivation mode of human existence.
So do you believe I guess I would assume yes, but do you believe in kind of like a collective consciousness and like a global consciousness? I guess we could start there.
Um, in like a Jung sort of Carl Jung sort of sense, collective unconscious.
Like like I'm trying to think of how to word this so I don't sound like crazy person, but as one
No
person
judgment.
like elevates and evolves and maybe transcends, then it kind of starts to bring other people, and then the more people that reach this level of self-actualization, like the better society gets, the better like the planet gets. Like, have you seen
Yes.
those meditations where they'll get a bunch of monks and they all pray for like one country or one like disaster
Mm.
that happens, and then you see a shift? Like, I wish I had the studies in front of me, but this is like real science. It's actually happened. So if you actually start seeing more people do this work, this internal work, then you can actually start seeing the
Yeah.
changes as a whole, like globally.
I do believe in that kind of contagion,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it certainly operates in the opposite way as well,
Mm-hmm.
which you really are seeing in this country right now. Um, this deprivation, motivation, contagion, I'll call it. Never quite put those three words together in a sentence before, but so you certainly see the opposite. I do think that there are transcendent moments of contagion, which you see at a dance, at a sports event. Can see it at a concert. When you have everyone together and we're all on board with the same thing. We hear the beautiful. I'm such a big fan of Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, for instance, or Jacques Dupre, the cellist, and for everyone in a concert hall hearing Yo-Yo Ma play um, a Bach concerto, uh, or the Elgar concerto is more likely for an orchestra, an Elgar concerto. It's so transcendent. Have you ever heard the Elgar concerto?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's just it brings me to tears every time I hear it. I'd like to send it to
Yeah,
you
please do. Eric probably
later.
does. He's very into classical.
Oh, he's gonna love
Mm-hmm.
this if he hasn't heard of it already. But the interesting thing is that you bring everyone together listening to that music. Suddenly it doesn't matter who you voted for during the last election. Now it's only after the song plays and then you start talking to people and they're like, oh, you vote for Trump, okay. You shouldn't be at this this
Mm-hmm.
concert. That then it activates all of these things. But what I'm really really passionate about is bringing out transcendent experiences in humanity that can help us um, really get in touch with our common humanity. There's lots of all like experiences like that as well. Everyone's sitting together watching the stars and the middle of the desert in Australia, for instance. If we could somehow bring everyone together in the world to do that together, um, and just feel like something higher. Now, a lot of religious people try to say they get, they're getting in touch with God in terms of a higher being, but I think that there is a spiritual form of transcendence that can rest on a scientific foundation that doesn't have to be tied to belief,
Mm-hmm.
but can instead be tied to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what God you pray to, or even if you're an atheist, gosh forbid, you're an atheist. We can all rally around these common transcendent experiences.
So when everything started going crazy at the beginning of 2020, I couldn't keep my eyes off of what was happening. I was following these
Yeah.
accounts that were posting minute by minute, like riots, protests, um, everything, right? Like COVID numbers, like just couldn't keep my eyes off of it. And I was having like such negative reactions to it, like physically, like anxiety through the roof. And I was like,
Mm.
I don't like what this is, who this is turning me into. So I'm normally like a pretty positive
Mm.
person, like a pretty hopeful person, like normally a very nice person. And this was making me like the opposite of all of those things. So I had to kind of force myself to unfollow certain accounts or mute certain accounts and then start following more positive accounts. And part of me fought
It's
that
when you
because they're
followed me.
yes, because your account is so positive and it's like no matter what's happening, like you can go to your Twitter account and you're finding a way to try to bring people together. And I think that's so beautiful because right now all you see on both sides is people saying this is why we're different, and you're like no no no, this is why we're the same, this is why we should all come
Mm.
together and love one another. And um I'm glad that you're hopeful and that I'm hopeful and that hopefully we can start coming together instead of pointing out differences because something's got to
Well, something does have to give,
give.
big time. We're all really at this deprivation motivation, and we're all competing in I refer to it as the Victimhood Olympics,
Hmm.
and it's it's causing us to not see how someone else's suffering who's in our out group might actually um, maybe we're having the same experiences. Again, I see this as analogous to the religious thing that I was saying, and experiences versus beliefs. You know, I would much prefer a world where people, you know, who've been discriminated. I mean, that we all rallied around similar experiences of like, well, we've all been discriminated against, and let's get in touch with that feeling and have compassion and empathy
Mm.
for others who've had it, even if they're in our out group.
Hmm.
It's like taboo these days. It's taboo for you're not allowed to care about someone in your out group. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like within your in group, it's taboo.
Hmm.
Like if you're in your in group and like, let's say you're a Democrat and a Trump supporter trips and falls, you're supposed to laugh at that person
Yeah.
and tweet, "Oh, look at this person tweet." And it definitely works the other way as well. If a Trump supporter sees, I mean, you see all those Ben Shapiro guys, all the people they're mocking
Hmm.
Democrats all day long, you know. But would it be would it be what is it against the law? Is there anything in the law book saying that Ben Shapiro can't just once like just be like, oh, that was a really cool thing that Democrat did. Much love, or oh, that Democrat's like having a lot of suffering right now. Let's all just like rally around and hope they get better. I don't know. Like, would
Because
it
then
be like such a bad thing?
you end up
Yeah,
being like homeless though, like ideologically homeless.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I've made some tweets that people forced me into the conservative bucket. And then I've said things that people on the conservative side are like, "Oh my gosh, you're such a lib." And I was like, "I don't belong anywhere. Like I'm actually registered independent. And just because of like something I said, you permanently put me over here." And then when I was criticizing what happened at the Capitol, everyone that followed me that is like super right was like, what do
I
you
know.
mean that violence is wrong? I'm like, what do you mean that it's not? Like, this shouldn't be controversial. Like, I should be able to say, I didn't like the violence that happened earlier in
I know.
2020, and I don't like the violence that's happening now. I don't care who's committing it. Like, I just think that there's a very, very, very rare time and place where that's your only option, right? I'm not going to use
Yes.
that idea in a vacuum and say it's always wrong because again there's going to be very 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 rare moments where that's your only option. That I have not yet to see a moment that was the only option. So I just think everyone's making the wrong decision there, and I got a lot of flack because I wasn't sticking to what that group was saying, which was like, this is our revolution. I was like, they broke in and were taking selfies and like people
I know.
died. Like, that's not a revolution. You guys are idiots.
I think one of the I feel you. First of all, I feel you. Like I totally hear what you're saying, and I think one of the benefits of being a special ed kid is that I don't care. Like I almost like I was born being an outsider, and why stop now?
Hmm.
Like I just gonna say what I think in for issue to issue. I try to keep my labeling to a minimum.
Hmm.
It's very there's a lot of pressure for instance, right now, there's a lot of pressure if you're in the intellectual circle like I am to be anti woke, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of pressure, like social pressure, to make fun of and mock anyone that we can put the label woke on, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I'm like, well, okay, am I allowed to just criticize issue to issue? Can I take like individual to individual and be like, okay, I don't agree with that what that person said, and here's my critique. I just don't want to be forced to put anyone under a single umbrella,
Mhm.
put a whole group of people who's a heterogeneous group of people, not a homogeneous group, but a heterogeneous group, under a single umbrella, because there are lots of people who have different opinions and thoughts within labels. And also, as a kid growing up with a label, I know how much that fucked me up
Mhm.
being labeled.
Mhm.
And so I have an aversion to labels. I have an aversion to being put in buckets.
Mhm.
And so I appreciate you. I appreciate what what you're doing, because I think that's brave. That's very brave of you to get to not work, not I don't know, the word cave is the right word, but like someone in your situation, one could say, well, okay, well, you have to just eventually just choose what's good, best for your brand. But I've personally been resistant about having a brand,
Mhm.
like, if anything, I want my brand to be that I don't have a brand. Like,
Mhm.
and that doesn't even make sense, but maybe that does make sense to you in a way. But
Mhm.
I think it takes bravery for you to get flack from and be like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to be nuanced, and if you don't comprehend nuance, that's not my problem.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think I'm similar in the way that I've been like obviously I've been labeled and people have had their prejudice because of like my career and everything. So I think
Mm.
like that makes me a little bit more thick-skinned and like able to say what I want without like being scared of how it's going to feel when people yell at me or call me names just because like I've
People
almost
call you
all the
names?
time, all the time. So it's almost like I've like calloused a little bit and I would say a good way um to where I
Mm.
don't let other like external factors negatively affect like how I feel about myself or self-worth, which has taken a very long time because it's certainly not easy. But it goes back to like ideologies and people putting you in a bucket. And if you like stray at all, then all of a sudden like like they have their rock ready and they're just gonna come for you. And it's like not
Mm.
everyone who does this one thing feel like you can we're not all the same, right? Like not everyone that was in the adult industry is one way. Not everyone that voted for Trump is one way. Not everyone that voted for Biden is one way. Like it's so
Mm.
complex. So unless you have like I don't know, like an
Mm.
individual experience with someone, you can't judge them. Do you know what I mean? They can't judge them off of the group that you or society's like forcing them into.
Well, yeah, I love what you're saying, and I'm just like, I think the key there is judgment, is judging.
Mm.
Like, what if we just didn't judge people? Like, is that a radical idea?
Radical. That's the craziest thing that's been said on all of my podcasts.
I don't the problem because the problem with like, I don't judge. Like, I have friends, they've said I have friends who are into the freakiest things, right? And I'm just like, and they'll admit it, because I want people to feel comfortable with me. That's something that really matters to me
Mhm.
as a coach, as a psychologist, and as with my friends.
Mhm.
And they'll say the freakiest things because they know that they're not going to get any judgment out of me.
Mhm.
Be like, oh, that's so cool. Like,
Uh-huh.
not my thing, but like, okay.
Mhm.
And what if we just saw people, treat people sacred. I want to get back to this idea of what that means to treat, because I think Maslow was onto something when he talked about the sacredness of each existence. It really is a sacred thing to exist. It's such a rare event.
Mhm.
When you think about all the different ways in which one couldn't conceive. For instance, I just got a text from a friend who just found out that that his wife had a miscarriage,
Oh, no.
and they're really really in a not a good place right now about that. And just all the ways to exist is a miracle. And to be able for someone to to honor that, given all the givens of existence, which um there are givens of existence which cause us to have suffering. I'm not the first person to say that. The Buddha said to be human is to suffer.
Mhm.
and just recognizing that, and realizing that someone is living look at a person with fascination, not judgment, I guess is what I'm saying. I look at people with just utter fascination. I'm in awe of how people choose to live their lives. Even if someone's like a horrible human, like I'm curious.
Mhm.
I'm like, my gosh, this is the way that that person has chosen to spend their very brief and improbable existence.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, what a way to look at it though. I totally agree. That's so if we were talking about branding, that's definitely one of the like if you were to say like purposes of the podcast and like the new trajectory I'm on is just like curiosity. It's not to have
yeah,
assumptions about someone or any like fields of work. It's to like have conversations with anybody and everyone that I find interesting and just ask questions because that's the only way you're going to learn. And it's funny because
yeah.
some of the more like controversial guests I've had on, I'm like, if you just listen, like they're actually a pretty nice person, like a pretty decent person. But we just like take
Yeah.
a snapshot of someone or like maybe one tweet that they said and we summarize their entire being as that. I'm like, that's just inaccurate. You just have to have like these more long form conversations. Otherwise, you're just never going to go anywhere.
I think that we're similar in a lot of ways. Actually, now I'm realizing this. Some ways we're definitely not similar. You know what I'm saying? But there's some ways. But there's some way. There are a lot of ways in just our essence of being. Because I don't know if you resonate with this, but if someone tells me like, "Oh, you can't talk to that person," that makes me want to talk to that person
Uh-huh.
more. I don't know if
100%.
you're the same. If you're this, so
100%.
so I've always been that way. Like in high school, like I would be like befriend the bad boy, friend,
Mhm.
or there's people like, "Oh, you can't, that person's bad news," and I'd be like, "Oh, I want to just go right toward it,
Yep.
and understand it." And uh, so anyway, I don't know if this is. I feel like we both have whatever that bone is.
100%, yeah, and I think, partially because, like, I've been in that category, like, I've had people be like, "Don't talk to her, stay away from her," whatever, so I think I resonate with that, um,
Mm,
and even beforehand, like, even in high school, like, I was always friends with, like, the punk rock kids or, like, the little outliers, and
yeah,
I'm like, "This is my
yeah,
family, that's where I'm gonna be." Everyone says, like, "Don't go there," and that's where I'm gonna go, and, yeah,
yeah,
it's deeply embedded for sure. Speaking
yeah.
about personalities, I definitely wanted to talk about this test before I take like all of your
Yes,
afternoon.
you took it.
I
You
did
took it,
take
right?
it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I was so nervous because I was like, what if I'm a bad Jedi? um,
No judgment.
no judgment. So I have it's the light triad facets, and it said it's lower on average by 11.2%. And that's, this one's the
But
faith in
here's the big question: is where were you? Where were you?
it
Where
said
did you see the
slightly
Yoda?
light. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But what did Yoda appear though?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah, 'cause
picture
he's
of
right here,
Yoda.
this one.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
okay. The picture of Yoda
Yeah.
appeared. So, whew,
Not Darth
that's what
Vader.
matters.
Okay.
That's what matters.
Okay, so we can still be
You're you're
friends.
you're you're on the light side of the Force,
Mhm.
but you're not. You're no saint over there.
No, definitely not. So I scored lower
Talk
than
to me.
average for faith in humanity by 11%, which actually kinda surprised me a little bit. Um
Okay.
And then with humanism, so valuing the dignity of worth of each human being, my score was greater by an average of 7.35%.
Cool.
The Kantianism, so treating people as ends in themselves, not means to an end, my score was
What was that?
greater by 25.1%.
Nice.
Yeah, that one I thought was cool because I have a lot of relationships around me that are the opposite, and I'm like, that just seems so dull that way. Like, well, you know what I mean? Don't do that.
And that's be love. That's You're a be loving person.
Oh,
We
so
can
that's what
say
that
that you're a be
means?
loving. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the facet most linked to be
See,
love.
people,
Yeah.
I'm telling the truth. And then this one wasn't
Yeah.
surprising at all. So narcissism, I scored higher by I don't have the percent, but the average was like slightly over 40 and mine was like slightly over 60. But I feel like that's
Yeah.
anyone that's like a public figure slash like
Entertainment
performer.
industry.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit.
Definitely, and there are certain facets of narcissism that they're not like bad. Like there's like exhibitionism. I don't know. Assume at one point in your life you might have scored higher than average in exhibitionism, but
Probably.
is that fair to say? But I mean that's a facet of narcissism, and it's neither good or bad. I mean, I score high in that facet. I love looking myself in the mirror. Like I'm not gonna lie about that. I love it. I have a skincare routine. I don't know if you
Oh,
can
I'm
tell, but
so
I
proud of
apply.
you. Yes, that's
I'm 40,
amazing.
41 years old, and
Oh, you got a
I
baby
don't look at.
face.
I know I got a baby face.
Yeah.
But no. So look, we can have a hilarity about some of this as well. Is like like the. In fact, the ones who like make pretend they're like these perfect beings with no imperfections, um, they tend to be the ones that don't have much of a sense of humor. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like it's like they can't laugh at themselves.
Mhm.
They can't laugh at. They can't like. They tend to be rigid about others being either black or white.
Mhm.
In terms of personality. Um, but I noticed you didn't read the other two facets of the dark triad.
Oh,
Are
wait.
you a psychopath?
Where Oh, no, they're right here. So, yeah.
Okay.
No, let's go over those for
I know. I
clarification.
noticed you didn't. I noticed you didn't.
So, for psychopathy, so callousness and cynicism, my score was lower by 20%. Is that good
Okay.
there or bad?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, there's no good or bad. I'm not judging. You're not like a card carrying psychopath, if that's what
Wait,
you're
so that
asking
means
me.
I
Yeah.
have more than the average if I'm 20% less?
Oh, you're 20% less on psychopathy. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Is that a
Oh,
good thing or a bad
that's
thing?
again. There's no good or bad really, but I think that does mean that you're yeah, you're less of a psychopath. Yeah, that's what
Okay,
it
okay,
means.
so yeah,
Yeah,
I'm less of
yeah,
a
yeah.
psychopath than the
Less.
average test taker. And
And
then
then what about Machiavellianism?
Machiavellianism, strategic exploitation and deceit. My score was actually greater by an average of 7.75%.
I wonder if you need that to for your business, to figure out strategy for how you can, put yourself into the world.
I would say definitely when I was an adult for sure. I think that served me 100%.
Oh, can you hold 1 second? I
Yeah.
think my Apple headphones are here. I'm coming. Is this my Apple headphones? Yes, thank you so much. Have a good day. Yay! I got my Apple headphones. I'm so excited.
Presents.
I'm so excited. Okay. All right. We're coming back. We're coming
We're
back.
coming back. We had important
Okay.
things. No, but yeah, I think that was definitely necessary. I think that helped me from getting trampled on a lot
Yeah.
while I was still shooting. Um, and
Yeah.
it's not significantly higher, so that's good. It's not like
Do you still it's not like what, like
it's
you're
not like
like
it's
a
not like all
full
the way up to
on.
like 80
Yeah.
percentile.
That's right. That's right. Do you still shoot?
Only for myself. So I only do like an
Mm,
OnlyFans. I stopped working for
uh,
companies like I don't know, like 4 years ago ish,
mm.
maybe 3. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And do you
It's
find that works better for you right now in your life?
100%. Like I think I don't really have any regrets with anything. I think everything happens for a reason, so I am always like grateful for every like lesson, hardship and
Yeah.
every blessing. Like it's all for a purpose. I would never
Nice.
go back. I would never do it again. I wouldn't take it back, but I would never go back in. It needs a lot of work. The industry needs a lot of work. So, it's definitely
I'd like to
better.
talk. I've had porn stars and porn directors on my podcast, the Psychology Podcast.
Oh, really?
Maybe it's maybe. Oh yeah, yeah. It's a topic I love covering. Sex work. I'm very interested in the psychology and how the psychological effects,
Mhm.
on people who are in there. Yeah, so maybe we can have you on the show
I would
sometime
love it.
because I'd like to. Yeah, I'm so curious. I'm so curious about that industry um, and to me, I think it takes so much courage to do that.
Mhm.
Like I think of what it would take in my psychological structure for me to like tweet out, "Here's me naked." Like I can't. Do you know what I mean? Like Scott
Uh-huh.
Barry Kaufman, I can't even imagine what that would be like require within myself
Mhm.
to feel comfortable enough and have that courage to, here's me having sex. like I think it takes a lot of courage. I don't think we really appreciate as much. Um, it's always boggles my mind when people do like slut shaming.
Mhm.
It boggles my mind because I always want to say to that person, well, would you have enough courage to express your desires in that way so openly and honestly? Like, I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
Like it's fascinating to me. Anyway, I didn't mean to go down that path, but
No, no, I
yeah,
think it's awesome, and then your perspective I think is very refreshing. So thank you for that.
mm,
But I think when you see people that get very defensive or critical about that, it's just because of like their own insecurities around whatever subject that might be, whether it's porn, sex work, or really any walk of
mm.
life, right? Like it has way more to do with that person and them not being able to visualize them doing it. So it must be wrong. Like I would never do that, so no one should ever do that, rather than recognizing we're all
But they're
individuals.
watching it. But they're probably watching it.
Yeah,
Like
if they're honest and admit it for sure. Like if you
uh,
can't deny all that traffic that goes to all those sites. But I hope that
oh, that's another thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I think a lot of it too is like the mystery around it. So being able to like have conversations with like people like yourselves, and I think more people would be open minded about it. But when you have like two
yeah.
porn people talking, no one's gonna listen because they're gonna think it's like very jaded and one sided and
Have
like
you ever,
dishonest.
met personally in your career, have you met Stoya?
No, I've never met her. Mm-mm.
Think you guys would get along. She was on my podcast. I find her views about the good and bad of the industry really fascinating, and yeah, I just thought maybe that would be someone I'd love to see you two in conversation with each other.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
I've watched a lot of hers. She's a pretty brave voice, because she was like one of the first like big name
yeah,
stars to come out against certain things. So she's definitely done a lot of good. Hmm.
absolutely. Well, cool. Again, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but I'm actually very fascinated about you and what you do. So maybe we can continue that conversation another day.
No, I would definitely love to. I remember when I think I followed you first, if I'm not mistaken. But when you followed me back, I was like really surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, like he doesn't care. Like he doesn't care of
What?
who I am or like what I do, like in a negative way. Like you weren't like
People would
judgmental.
care?
Yes, like I've had people that they'll be like, "Oh, I really like your tweets and you seem cool, but I can't follow you because of like porn." I'm like, "That's so I get it. I get
Huh.
it, but it happens a lot." It's definitely disappointing when it does.
Well, if I wanted, if I cared about my integrity whatsoever, I shot that in the foot recently because I created a TikTok account of me dancing.
I was looking at those today before our call, and I was dying because it made me think of how you got into university, and you were saying that you
Yeah,
just went to like an opera tryout, and then you
that's
talk
right.
about
Yeah,
applying
yeah.
for like the not minor, and you were like running away in your tights, and I'm like, I just got such a
That's
good
right.
visual, and I thought it was amazing. So keep making
Yeah.
TikToks because I enjoy them.
Oh, I'm like all in. Do you see my Backstreet Boys one?
That's so good.
So I was gonna say, if I cared about a shred of dignity, then yeah,
Then it was gone.
it's almost freeing to have it gone, you know. And then,
Mhm.
people who appreciate authenticity appreciate it, and you can't please everyone, right?
Mm-mm.
So
No, you definitely
yeah.
can't. So one of the last points I wanted to bring up is you had an article that I saw you retweeting today, which was on spiritual narcissism, which I thought was really cool because I was actually just talking to Eric about it earlier today because we have some people like this in our circle that they do one mushroom trip and all of a sudden they have this ego about them and you can't talk to them or debate them or try to rationalize with certain things because they think that they've now reached this level of enlightenment that you simply have not. So I
Nirvana.
right, like see, I'm here, I've arrived. So
Yeah.
to some people, feel like they think that's like a paradox to be spiritual and then also to have like this level of narcissism because you would think that spiritual elevation is like the removal of ego. But what I see happening sometimes, and especially with some Silicon Valley members, is that it actually creates like a super ego. So can you explain a little bit about that article and I guess like the inspiration behind it?
So the reason why you asked me why I got
Hmm.
why am I interested in that topic?
Hmm.
I think that I've long been interested in the topic of spiritual narcissism, because it it felt to me like so many people in the spiritual community were just so like thinking that they have evolved in some sort of egoless way, and that didn't appear to that's not what I saw. I saw a lot of ego. I saw not only that, but it seemed like the more spiritual practice they put into it, the bigger their ego became. So it just almost seemed like a correlation, and that was opposite of what is promised.
Mm,
The promise didn't the hype didn't seem to live up to the actuality
mm,
of the matter. And I saw some studies on this, and I wanted to put all together into an article, because there are enough robust, high powered psychological studies that are starting to give us a picture of the matter, and seems that the spiritual domain is not exempt from um, this what's called the self-centrality principle. Anything that we start to view as part of our core to our identity, we become attached to in some way, and it starts to be threatened. Uh, it becomes part of our ego as
mm,
well. So uh, people who are trying to do spiritual practices may develop, if they're not careful, spiritual narcissism, because they're not becoming aware of those patterns that are happening.
mm,
I think that meditation and a lot of mind body practices are at their best when they allow us insight into our mind, and our ability to see ourselves from the outside, even though we're still on the inside, but kind of non-judgmentally look at our patterns of thoughts and behaviors, and become aware of just how driven lots of our things are by the ego. I think that's a great benefit of a lot of mind body practices. But when they instead become a way of getting likes, you know um like be like, look everyone, I meditated today. Like, oh yeah, I got 1,000 likes for that. That that takes us away from what I think at its best it could be.
mhm,
Does that make sense?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
really good. I think it comes down to like what you said about like self-identifying and then like having these things, and there's like that philosophical question of like who are you, and if you strip away all of these things, like are you still the same person? And what I've found, at least so far, and I'm still like a kind of a dummy when it comes to, to this stuff, I'm still trying to like learn, but it's just that you're simply the observer to all of these things, like you're not this thing,
That's
and
right.
then that helps a lot when it comes to ego and like openness to like learning and admitting like when you don't know something, and being able to grow.
That's exactly right. That observing mind, the eye, the being able to view your thoughts like a carousel on the airport. When I haven't been to an airport in a while, but
No.
I almost forget what it looks like. But with the luggage going around, your thoughts like the luggage, but you don't pick it up.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna pick up that luggage today, or this time. I'm gonna let it come around again. No, I'm not gonna pick it up. Not gonna. And being able to yeah, like create that space between the stimulus response, and the response is really what it's all about. But yeah, a lot of people just they see a different promise of these practices, like, oh, it'll let me have better sex. Oh, it'll help me be more successful. Oh, if it's almost like the kindness thing we talked about earlier. you know don't develop your kindness muscles so that you can be more competitive.
Hmm.
Like,
Like
you
having
know
that means to
um
an end, kind of.
Correct. A
Hmm.
lot of this, that's a theme of our whole of all this, we talking about today is, are things means to an end, or are they, they're the most transcendent values. Maslow called them the B values, the values of being themselves: beauty, meaningfulness, justice, fairness, uh, um, completeness, wholeness. All these things are ends in themselves. They're not things we need to do means to an end. Be love.
Hmm. Well, that's
Yeah.
like a beautiful place to end. I want to say thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. This was amazing. Can you tell the listeners where they can follow you, how they can support you, and any projects that you're working on?
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really am grateful for you inviting me to be on your show. You can find me at scottbarrykaufman.com is my webpage, and I have everything on my webpage. You can find me on Instagram at Scott Barry Kaufman. I have yoga pictures of myself. No, I'm joking. They're quotes. They're inspirational quotes. But I now have recently a TikTok account, so follow me on TikTok at SB Kaufman, where I have self-development kind of quotes interspersed with dancing moves.
Yeah, all great stuff. Well, thank you so much. Give this man a follow, check out his books, and I'll talk to you soon. That's it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have the time, please rate and review, and you can always hit subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. I hope to have you back.